this was not up to you, so, but we're still glad you're here. This is why we enjoy working with you all. How many of you have heard us do this workshop before? I know some of the upperclassmen who've done this in classes with you before, so it'll sound a lot like what we've done in the past. This is really intended to be an intro kind of experience. So this is, our assumption is maybe this is your first resume that you've really kind of created on your own, and we want to help you think through ways to do that. So one of the temptations in this world is the Google resume templates on Word or whatever document source you want to use, and just go with their text boxes, and we want to help you think through it in a way to do it different than that. So a couple of just pieces of information to get started. There's a number of handouts that we'll walk through the evening. The white form is your ability for us to document that you were here, so that's your that's what we'll use to let Dan know that you completed that requirement for the class. If you're an SDL110, we would appreciate, even if you're not in that class, that you do that. I know that some other faculty have asked students to come to this, so I'm not exactly sure who all is here because of that and who just came because they wanted to. So that's the one that we'll get at the very end and make sure that you leave that for us. So do you have any other thoughts, Dan? All right. So I'm going to get us started, and then Anna will wrap us up. But so when you think about a resume, I want you to think about it in light of, I guess, as you consider what it was like to be pursued to come to college, wherever you went. Talk about how many schools did people hear from? I want you to throw out some numbers for me. 5? 50? Okay. That's not over exaggeration. My daughter's a junior, and we're getting close. Tell me about the forms that they have tried to come after you. Like what did you receive from them? Pamphlets, okay. Yeah. Facebook, okay. So which ones do you remember the most, like that maybe had the most meaning to you? What was that? Phone call? Okay. So when you think about applying for something, right now you're applying for a leadership position. Some of you have been applying for internships as well. And then ultimately you're going to be looking for full-time jobs later on. And so when you think about that, you're putting yourself on the other side of that. You're needing to try to come up with a way that really communicates to who you're reaching out to, that you want to really validate that you both really want to work or want that experience, and that you can clearly show that you align with what they're looking for. So what that means is that there's not really a one-size-fits-all way of writing this document. It will have a similar structure, but your experiences you may communicate them differently. They may hold more weight based on what you're applying for, and you're just wanting to spend time to really understand what you're applying for before you do that. Like all these web job search industries really make it really easy to apply for things. And what you'll find is that as you do that, you're just replicating the same thing over and over again, and that really would not communicate what we're talking about, right? It's just, I remember working with a student, and she told me she applied for 80 positions in a half hour. And is she getting traction? No. So we start over again, so that's some of what this leads to is trying to help you be purposeful in the way you communicate your experiences, but also really trying to understand who you're wanting to reach out to and do that in a way that really communicates. So that's ultimately your goal, and that's ultimately the reason why we talk about resumes the way we do. Another thing that I want you to think about is that there was a time when you could get away with just saying things like, I'm a good communicator, I'm a good team player, I have good communication. And so and that was referred to as a functional resume. And what that did was it allowed you to talk about soft skills or things that were hard to quantify in just a way that you could list it out and kind of categorize it. And that worked for a while. What we find now is that most of the time they want to see those experiences inside of an experience and kind of prove the skills inside of something that you've done. And so that's another reason why we'll be talking about this the way we do. But to get us started on that, there's a yellow form on your paper, and we refer to it as the concept map. And you'll see a variety of different ideas as to ways to break down your experience. So what I want you to do is start, we're going to give you a few minutes to reflect on this a little bit. So start writing down ideas that connect to those 5 areas. I would add in that if you're an athlete, you can kind of adapt maybe leadership or volunteerism as one of those areas that you would use to communicate that, because that is a place you'll learn a lot of experience. So I want you just to start throwing around ideas. Ultimately, hopefully by the time you're a junior, a lot of these will be things that have happened since you've been in college, and that things that you did in high school will not be on your resume. However, for now, for most of you, this is going to be primarily things that you did before you came to Spring Arbor, but anything that you've done since then is great too. So when you think about your academic work, that's your major, possible minor, or any kind of concentration. Anything you brought in before you arrived is good to add in. So if you had some AP credit or dual enrollment. So take a couple of minutes and talk to the person beside you and see the thing that they've done. Sometimes seeing other people's experience will remind you of things that you've experienced at this point. So take a few minutes to do that as well.
I just thought about what I had.
He doesn't know. Where's the cord?
I'm not trying to do. I'm just here for the time.
I think you gotta bring it to the class. I think you gotta bring it to Friday.
Vicky, that when we were still
I'm happy to do it.
don't say it, don't say it. Treehole.
So we have to say something. He just has to say it. I'm just like, bring it up.
Remember the commercial where they're like, hey, and bring a bucket of water. Yes. I did. Spreader. Is that what it's called? A rib spreader. Link. Certifications of skills. I'm pretty sure this. I'm pretty sure, like, I don't even watch it. I mean, it kind of depends on the
You did a great job.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and keep going. One more thing before Anna transitions to thinking through more of the structure pieces of this. I would like you to kind of get in your head what do you perceive the role, or multiple roles, if that's possible, part of what your goal is. What you think the jobs are that you're applying for. So for most of you, that's student leadership. Kind of start to envision, hopefully you've had some conversations with, if it's your current RA or whoever, that you're, the position that you're wanting to apply for, and kind of envision what you perceive that role to be. And on your paper, go ahead and circle, you know, as you reflect on that, the experiences that you think may be the most relevant or the things that you really want to highlight as you write your resume. So take just a couple minutes real quick and just really think about the position and then circle the things that you really feel like are going to be key for your specific resume.
Oh, wait.
volunteered as an
All right, we will start moving on. So I'm going to kind of go through a little bit more of like why a resume, but then also how to start actually writing it, right? So as Chad said, this document is kind of the marketing piece for yourself. It's you on paper. And so this is something that is within your control. You are in control of how it looks. You're in control of what is on it and how you communicate it, like this is, be proud of this when you're working on it, because this is who you are on paper, and you want to be able to put and communicate exactly what you want to about yourself to a certain person. So remember, this is in your control. Another thing too, how many of you are freshmen this year? How many of you are sophomores? Couple juniors? Juniors good? Any seniors in here? All right, good. So one of the things that Chad and I see that is the most sad is when we meet with a senior and they're like, I made a resume in SDL110 my freshman year and I haven't updated it since. Like, okay, there's a lot that has happened. You've had summer jobs, you've had experiences on campus, you've volunteered, I'm sure. So what I want to challenge you all today is to make this a living document, that it's something like you keep on your desktop, right? And you're always adding to it. Because when you come to the point where you're like, oh, I need that internship, what have I done in my last 2 years of college? Make it a habit that you are articulating exactly what you did and when you did it, so that you can be accurate and talk about things, because this is going to impact your future. And you're going to remember it best when you record it in real time. Does that make sense? So that's my challenge to you, that keep this, and we'll talk a little bit too about how, this isn't just a one-size-fits-all document. You really want to communicate exactly how you reflect doing that job that you're applying for. So it's going to look, I would write it differently, my resume, if I wanted to be the intramural director on SGA versus my library job, right? See how different those two things can be. I have experience with both. I can do both of those things, but my resume would look really different and make me look really attractive with either of those positions, but I wrote it differently. So I kind of said this, it reflects your qualifications for a position. It really can be used as an agenda for your interview. So usually if you get called in for an interview, it's because they liked what they saw on paper and they want to ask you more questions about that. Then it's also a good reminder for you to talk about past experiences, to bring up that one time when blah, blah, blah. This is exactly how I would interact, blah, blah, blah. So, let's see. All that is kind of it. All right, some of the non-negotiables for your resume, these should be obvious, but it needs to be honest, right? So remembering when you ended a job or when you started a job, that's really important. If there's a discrepancy on your resume versus, sometimes you'll submit a resume and an application for a job. If there's a difference there, it can cause problems. And maybe you didn't mean to, but what the interviewer, the hiring committee sees is, oh, they aren't detail oriented, first of all, and maybe they're just dishonest. So you don't want to count yourself out. You want to talk positively about experiences. Chad will talk a little bit more about that because he has a good example. So you don't want to just say, I just blah, 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 flipped burgers at McDonald's. You want it to be positive and say, like, I learned a lot in this experience. And then it needs to be brief, because this says you get 20 to 30 seconds if it's read, but we hear that really, if you're in a pile of different resumes, you're only going to get 8 seconds of someone's attention on you. So you want to make sure that it's attractive and that they're invited into reading more about you. So, and also without error. So it's good to check, double check, and triple check your spelling. Make sure it's consistent, because sometimes that's just the easiest thing. Oh, the no pile because they spelled spring arbor wrong or something like that. You wouldn't want to do that. on your table is our example of a student who may be like sophomore-ish level, right? So you're going to see, so what we talk about is if you only have 8 seconds to impress somebody, you want the top third to reflect the most applicable and relevant experience that you've had. So that top third of the page is really what you want to focus on. We recommend you put your education first because this is what you're investing your life in right now, right? You're spending countless hours and a lot of money to get this degree. And so for the most part, this is what you want to communicate, that you're working on your education and this is what your major is. Here are some of the relevant courses I've taken, etc. So, and then if you are applying for a job, whether it's student leadership or maybe it's this summer for a job, you want to talk about your work experience next. So that would be like the 2 main headings that I would recommend. You know, talk about your education and then also like what makes you a valid competitor for this position. So because you are in college now, you won't put your high school education, your high school experiences or education. So it's required that you have a GED or high school to get into college, so that kind of falls off. Once you graduate from college, if you go on to graduate school, you'll keep your college there and list your degrees, but high school isn't relevant anymore, which, you know, maybe that hurts your heart a little. But the other most important thing is your name. Notice like we have, there's a lot of ways to share your name, but what I want you to think about is it needs to be prominent, because if you think, like, fan out all of those, I know they're all the same, but if you fan out the green sheets on your table, think of how many people you might be in the same stack with. You want to make sure that your name is big enough that I'm picking up Jordans, you know, and I know I'm picking up Jordans. If it's size 12 font, it's going to get lost, or maybe I'll think it's somebody else's second page. No, that happened to you. So we also encourage you to put your contact information. Now is a good time to start using your Arbor email because it's really professional. It's your first name, last name. It's not like, oh, what was one that I saw with any Lord of the Rings fans in here? Hobbit4Christ@gmail.com. Right, don't be that person. Use your professional email. And then it's also just really, you know, it's easy on the mental capacity to type it in. But it's, oh, you're just first stop texting. And then you can feel free to include your cell phone number as a direct way to contact you as well. If you're applying for, for student leadership roles, it doesn't matter if you use your home address or your school address. For those, it doesn't matter. But let's say you are maybe applying for a job close to home. Maybe you want to use your home address for the summer because you're going to be living there and they're going to see, oh, they're local. If you use your Spring Arbor address, you're like, how are they going to commute to Traverse City? You know, that sort of thing. So, any questions about that point or aspect of it? All right, how do you get started? We already got you started with the yellow sheet. Making lists of different things that you've done. You'll see that there's lots of different headings you can have. Sandra has education, work experience, leadership experience, and volunteer. Maybe you have some other ones as well. Maybe you have some certifications. You know, you've been a lifeguard and you want to talk about you're certified to such and such, or different things like that. So you can choose which categories make the most sense for you. These are just really common ones. Maybe you're a college athlete and you want to talk about that. that's also really good. The relevant coursework, that's also important. So if maybe you say you're an accounting student and you want to find an accounting internship this summer, you're gonna list the classes that you've had. Even though I'm a sophomore, I've had these classes, and it would sound and meet their needs. So, does that make sense? All right, so coming down to layout as well, you all are really only going to use one page. So if you have more than one page, you're going to start condensing your experiences. It's not a lie to leave something off your resume. You're just making it the most relevant for the position. There's really only a few exceptions that you in your career right now that would have more than one page. So we're going to encourage you to keep it there. Like I said, make it easy to read. Make sure that you don't have big blocks of text. You're going to see that Sandra did lots of bullet points. We start bullet points with a verb. That's another handout on your table. That if you don't want to use the same verb all the time, assisted, 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 blah, blah, blah. So if you need more words, just look and see what you've done, see what other, original thesaurus, whatever you do. So, but you're going to start with a really powerful verb. If it's something in the past, make it past tense. If it's something you're still doing now, you can leave it as present tense or past tense. You have done it, you're still doing it, doesn't matter. But you're not going to use paragraphs. That's more for a cover letter when you're actually articulating some kind of narrative. But resumes are all about short and sweet, trying to get to just the most important information. And then just visually, it needs to be appealing. One of the things that's helpful is if you can keep the margins consistent all around. So it makes like a nice frame. It's just easier on the eye than having like all your text on one side or, that sort of thing. Spread it out. Use your white space effectively. And then utilizing, the bold, underline, spacing, capitalization, that sort of thing. I'd encourage you not to do any kind of super fancy font, make sure that using a standard font like Calibri or Times or something like that will actually help you too. If you have to email it to somebody, then it doesn't get all jumbled, because most computers have those texts. And another side note too, when you send it, it's helpful that you send it as a PDF, so that way you can organize and you know how it looks and you know how it's going to be seen once you send it. All right, so just a couple good exercises. Have some people who know you look over your resume after you've written it to see what their thoughts are, just a fresh look. What would you consider me adding or changing, or what's confusing, that sort of thing. You're going to get that with the SDL110 class, because you're going to be graded on the resume, right? But Chad is also here to help do that resume kind of review for you. You guys could, edit your own, each other's too. We talked a little bit about action verbs. Here are just some more. I talked a little bit about this too. Just using appropriate paper. We really recommend that you don't use any kind of color. We've just heard that it is a little bit unprofessional to use color in a resume. If you were a graphic designer or someone else, more of the artistic side, there are some exceptions, but for a standard business resume, black and white is really key. If you want to print it out, the career office has some paper, resume paper, that you can use and pay for. some don'ts. Chad mentioned this too. The temptation to use a Word document template is really strong because a lot of them look really cool or they seem really easy. But what's going to happen is by the time you are a senior, you're going to be adding more experiences and you're going to be trapped by those text boxes. And if you delete it or if you press enter, it's just going to freak out and you're going to lose all of what you've done. So we really just recommend opening a blank Word document. If you want to mimic what one of those are, that's fine. But just you have it to the side and then start writing it and entering lines or whatever font you like. But just stay away from the Google and the Word. The other thing too about it, it's really funny. You think it looks really unique, but then when you're in the pile and you see, well, there's 4 other ones that are using the same template. It's not so unique anymore, which is sad. But you don't anticipate that. You should not ever put your photo on it. You shouldn't, this is a helpful list, but in the end, you really shouldn't downplay your accomplishments. Chad, would you want to talk a little bit about speaking, sharing positively your experiences?
Yeah. So Anna touched on this. A lot of times, even today, I was meeting with a student and he just made the comment, I just worked at McDonald's. And so what that tells me is that maybe that's how they approach the job. That's often a job that's easy to get in the door. You probably didn't have to have a resume to get hired by McDonald's, but all that to say is the way you show up and do the work is also the way you need to communicate it. So if you were diligent, if if they really respected your work and asked you to train new employees, those kind of ideas need to live in that experience, even if it feels like something that you didn't have to work hard to get. And so with that, at this point, the RDs or whoever's looking at your resumes, they expect that those are the kind of jobs you've had. So just be careful, make sure you're communicating it the way you really showed up and lived it out, and not like this isn't an important job. Because the reality is that when you go into McDonald's and you're a customer and you don't get the right thing that you ordered, it gets frustrating. Talk to Scott Crable, he's got a lot of funny stories about going to McDonald's and not getting what he wanted. But anyway, I would even add a little bit about athletics. Patrick, do you mind if I pick on you a little bit? So Patrick, he plays ping pong a lot, so I see him there, and I go into his marketing classes a lot, so I get to see him. And so one of the benefits of being known is that people know how you are and who you are. So one of the things I would say about Patrick is that he's funny. So people around him are laughing, he creates a easy context, but he also has kind of got this little teasing thing that happens with his faculty, which is kind of funny too, especially with Dr. Knight. So anyway, that's to set aside the tennis component of Patrick. So Patrick is clearly competitive too. So if you ever watch him play ping pong, he's really competitive and he goes at it really hard. And I'm assuming that that's how he approaches tennis too. But when he's writing his resume to be an RA, because that's what he told me last week that he's applying for, the competitiveness is assumed because he's a tennis player, that he works hard, he goes out and plays matches. So that part, the reader will assume that. The other things that are assumed is that he really wants to win. So the language that Patrick needs when he describes being a tennis player doesn't need to be about how competitive he is or how many matches he won. So that can be maybe one description, but that's not the goal of expressing that experience for Patrick. The goal of that is to talk about how he helps his other teammates be better. The goal of that is how he shows up and does a great GPA along with working hard to be a tennis player. That translates into his life because you have to help people succeed. You have to help people, you have to get through your own stuff well because it's hard to show up. So that drivenness of being an athlete. So just so as you're thinking about your experiences, don't always assume that you know, the easy things to communicate or what people really want to read. I mean, so that's, again, translating back into what you're applying for and how that experience can line up with that. Would you add anything to that, Patrick?
You could have told me that last week before RAS.
You know, Dan said you could return it in, right? He said that in class. He said you can resubmit a new resume. Yep. So you have a chance.
At least I can read on it.
Yeah, you can do that. There's that humor that runs your actual program. You know, that'll make it a lively floor. So thankfully his already know him and he's got a good reference with Dr. Knight. So.
Great, thanks, Chad. Okay, the last thing I kind of want to talk through too, I don't want to miss this, is the layout of your resume really needs to be as a timeline working with the most recent first. You know, when you read a book, a history book, you start way at the beginning, you know, and then read up until today. The resume works backwards. So I'm going to list first what I'm doing right now and then go back in time chronologically. Does that make sense? Because as a hiring manager, I'm more interested in what you're doing as a senior than what you did your freshman summer. Does that make sense? You know, because more than likely that senior second semester is going to be more relevant to the role that you're applying for than maybe your summer job freshman year. So that's really important. If you, let's say, for instance, you wanted to talk about, let's say okay, so let's say I'm applying for an internship that works with kids with autism, right? So maybe, or maybe it's like in marketing, and I'm a marketing major, so I wouldn't actually be working with that, but I'd be working for the organization. Let's say I did the CASE program my freshman and sophomore year, but then life got busy and I couldn't do it. That would probably be chronologically at the bottom of my resume, right? Because it's the furthest back in time. But I want it to be really relevant because I want people to know that I have a heart for people and that I really understand what this organization is doing. So that's where you can use those headings to your advantage. You can say, instead of work experience, relevant experience, and bring it up to the top because that would be relevant to what I'm applying for. Does that make sense? So I could talk about like my latest marketing internship and then my CASE involvement, and then list my work experience of da-da-da-da-da, even though those came in between those two roles. Does that make sense? So this is where, like, if I'm going to use my best content for the third, for top third, you want to just play with it. So using relevant experience is a good way to elevate those jobs or volunteering that you've had. Yeah, do you have any last things, Chad, or do you guys have any last questions as you start to write your resume? I'll just point out the last handout we didn't talk about is just this checklist. So if you want to start writing it, you know, and then walk through this, this is essentially our presentation on paper. So you can do a little self-check by just going down and make sure that you've ticked all these boxes to make sure that it's the best that it can be.
So for you who are SDL110, like this will be somewhat what your graders use as a rubric. It's similar, so just know that that's, when you get a final grade for your resume, they're using that as kind of an idea to kind of guide you through that. And they'll look at the sample and to use that to kind of give them ideas of how to grade, because it is a subjective thing. I mean, resumes are, it really depends on the reader, and it's never the same. So just know, I mean, Anna did talk about creativity being okay, but not in design. I guess I would add that the creativity needs to come out in your language, like how you use it. But the design of the sample is really to help you communicate quickly and to get through your information fast. So that's, I mean, if you come see me in 4 years, I'm going to show you something that's really similar in the design. And that doesn't mean that you haven't had a new experience. I'm just meaning that I want to help you demonstrate that as quick as possible and it's a really easy read. And so that's the goal of the way it's structured. So, all right, make sure you fill out your white paper. We would appreciate a comment on that last 3 questions, just to get your feedback on how you feel like this helps you prepare to do this. And then you're free to leave those on the tables and head out.
Literally.
Are we good?